You're watching the legal breakdown. So, Glenn, there's been reporting on both sides of the aisle about the possibility of a delay in Trump's Florida trial, which is an issue that we've obviously been following very closely. What's happening in Florida right now?
So, Brian, as of right now, Donald Trump's Florida prosecution remains May 20th. However, there are some ominous signs in Judge Cannon's newly issued 9-page order. What she did was she reset a full dozen deadlines, pushed them down the road, some significantly. So now there are 12 different deadlines set for the parties to accomplish different things with respect to getting clearances finalized, with respect to being able to review some of the classified documents, with respect to filing some motions and some reply briefs. So right now there are a dozen different deadlines set between November 11th and February 22nd. But here's what the judge did. She said that I am not yet going to revisit the trial date and push it further down the road. So I am rejecting your motion defense. However, I'm rejecting it without prejudice. What does that mean? It means that they can refile that motion seeking to push the trial date further down the road when the time is right. And here is a sure sign of when we're going to be having this conversation again. The judge said on March 1st, we're all going to get together and we're going to talk about this again. And we're going to see whether at that time I should push the trial date further down the road. Now, here's the thing. I have been one of the most vocal critics of Judge Aileen Cannon. I don't think she has any business presiding over this case, not just because Donald Trump was the one who appointed her to the federal bench with a job for the rest of her life, a pretty nice perk, but because she really has done so many things that cause people to question her impartiality. And the federal law says if a judge's impartiality might reasonably be questioned, that's the language of the statute, then she must remove herself. She must recuse. Of course, she hasn't done that. And importantly, Jack Smith hasn't asked her to do that. So listen, I don't think she should be presiding over this case, but she is, and it looks like she will continue to be the presiding judge. But this ruling, this order, Brian, resetting some of the deadlines that had been set a little bit earlier, I think is a legitimate call. There's lots of discussion about how discovery, that is the stuff the prosecutors have given to the defense attorneys, is much more voluminous than even the prosecutors thought. So I really think it's a responsible thing to do, pushing some of these deadlines down the road. I'm hoping she's not doing it nefariously, sort of all along intending to continue the trial date, push the trial date further down the road. She might be. But I think once they get together on March 1st, here's what we're going to know. We are going to know if Donald Trump's criminal prosecution in Washington, D.C. will really begin on March 4th. The parties will clearly know that when they get together down in Florida on March 1st. And if Judge Chutkan continues to keep that trial date firm, and I predict she will, that is when I suspect Judge Cannon will say, okay, reality has set in. Donald Trump and his lawyers will be in trial for the next 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks up in Washington, D.C. It is now unrealistic to have them go from that really significant federal prosecution and jump right into a May trial in Florida. I think by all accounts, that would be unmanageable. So all in all, I don't think this is an irresponsible thing or an outrageous order for Judge Cannon to have issued.
Okay, so to clarify here, she isn't outright delaying the trial. She refused to grant that to Donald Trump and his team. But if she delays some pretrial classified documents deadlines, some SEPA deadlines, doesn't that ultimately push back other classified documents deadlines? And won't that inevitably delay the trial anyway?
Not inevitably, but I mean, it's a great point, because the more you push all of these deadlines down the road, the more other deadlines are going to slide. And the natural sort of result might be that, May becomes less and less realistic for a trial date as you push all these other deadlines. All of that being said, I still don't think this was an irresponsible thing for her to do. And it may be inevitable that once the DC trial starts in March, everybody realizes at that point, okay, Donald Trump is not going to go to trial in May in Florida.
Okay. Glenn, I think for people watching right now, we're almost 150 episodes in. I think everybody knows what your betting limit is by now. So let's put the dollar on the line here. And my question is, do you think that this trial actually happens before the 2024 election?
Oh, I was hoping you were going to ask me to lay a bet on whether the May trial date would hold or not. I would probably put the full buck on
Yeah.
no way that May trial date is going to hold, mainly because I have confidence in Judge Chutkan and her determination to take Donald Trump to trial in Washington in March. I think if Donald Trump gets convicted in Washington, D.C., beginning in March, and he inevitably will, I then don't think the documents obstruction and espionage case in Florida will be resolved before the election. But at that point, I think it will be academic, because I firmly believe Donald Trump will be convicted in D.C., he will be sentenced to prison in D.C., and he will be incarcerated. And then, I'm sorry, the Republicans are going to have to scramble to find a new leader and a new nominee. So I think the Florida trial just becomes less important at that point.
Okay. That's a big prediction for a buck. That's feels like it would be a bigger prediction than a buck, but okay, we'll give you that. To that point, talk to me about the impact that Judge Cannon can have in Florida on conviction and sentencing. I know that it's clear by now that she's going to help Trump wherever she can, but what about the verdict and the sentence here? What can her involvement be, and how can it redound to Trump's benefit?
That's a great question, because a judge should have absolutely no impact on the jury's verdict, right? However, she can really impact a case in 1,000 ways, some of them tangible, some of them intangible, and unfortunately, very few of them appealable by the prosecution. For example, let's start with jury selection. The judge has wide latitude deciding which jurors are qualified and which jurors are disqualified. So, you know what? If she plays some games, if she doesn't call jury selection right down the middle, she could actually help Donald Trump and his lawyers pack the jury with some really pro-Trump jurors. Then she will rule on every single evidentiary issue. Every time a party objects, Brian, she will be the gatekeeper. She'll be the one to decide whether she wants to grant that objection or overrule that objection. In a very real sense, she controls every shred of evidence that will make it into the jury box and that will be considered as part of the evidence, and whether the prosecution can prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. So in 1,000 ways, some tangible, some intangible, she can have an enormous impact on the ultimate verdict. However, if she makes all these calls down the middle, then it should be entirely within the province of the jury to decide Donald Trump's guilt or innocence. When it comes to the sentence, so assuming Donald Trump is convicted on multiple counts, and I suspect he will be, there are what's called the federal sentencing guidelines. They set out the parameters, the sort of window of what an appropriate sentence is for a conviction of any given crime. So I don't think she's going to be able to completely just blow out the sentencing window and say, you know what, the sentencing guidelines recommend 8 years in prison for a particular offense of conviction, but I'm going to give him probation, because there are times when the prosecutors can, and we have seen the prosecutors appeal sentences that they believe are unreasonably, if not unlawfully low. So
Right, they're doing that right now in the against the Proud Boys in that federal case.
Exactly. So it's been done before, and prosecutors won't be afraid to do it again. So I'm actually less concerned that in the event a jury convicts him, that Aileen Cannon will go so far below the federal sentencing guidelines that she opens herself up to an appeal.
Okay, well, obviously, a lot to stay on top of with this case. So, for anybody watching, if you want to stay on top of everything, please make sure to subscribe. The links are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.